What is up, my people? It's your boy, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And of course, today we are coming back to you right here, live and direct, with another draft breakdown. We got Ronnie Bell from Michigan University on the docket today. I'm excited to talk about Ronnie Bell, who he is, what Kyle Shanahan is going to really love about Ronnie Bell's game, and of course, some areas where I feel like he can improve and maybe why he was a seventh round pick and not higher. All right, we're going to dive into all that and more. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe button, all that good stuff. But Ronnie Bell, let's talk about it. All right. So first, I kind of use myself as kind of the starting point when it comes to talking about receivers and defensive backs. Obviously, I had the just pleasure of being able to play football at a high level, and I understood kind of what my limitations were. And I look at other guys like, man, I wish I had that ability, or I wish I had that ability, or man, I'm glad I do this better than this guy, or oh man, these type of receivers give me a lot of trouble, and oh man, these type of receivers are a lot easier for me, but this cornerback guards this guy better, etc. So I kind of use my experiences as a starting point, and then I kind of build off from there when it comes to receivers and defensive backs and my evaluations. And Ronnie Brown, not Ronnie Brown, Ronnie Brown, former running back out of Auburn, Ronnie Bell out of Michigan, no different. All right. So first of all, start with the measurables. 6 feet tall, 191 pounds. So he kind of has a slight build and kind of reminiscent of Dante Pettis, kind of right. Okay. But 4.54 40 yard dash time, 38.5 vertical jump, which is legit. 10-foot broad jump, a little bit more average. Three cone, legit, 6.98. And the other numbers, whatever, 14 reps on the bench press. All right, so 14 reps on the bench press for a receiver that's 190 pounds, that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid. And there is an area where you can kind of clearly see some of his strength, and he takes pride in that. All right, I'm excited to talk about that. But the three cone, Kyle Shanahan, and anybody that has been paying attention to his receivers, he loves guys that have a legit three cone, and he has that, right? You want to see the kind of that short area, change of direction, and then obviously, like, how does that translate to the guy's game? And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how does his game translate to the NFL? So Ronnie Bell in 14 games last season, 62 catches, almost 900 yards. It was like 887 yards, something like that. Four touchdowns, two of which came in the bowl game against TCU. We're going to get to those. And I want to talk about what's consistent, right? Like we can see highlights. I was on scrolling through Instagram, and I see one of the Instagram pages. I want to say it was Raj's. I don't want to get it confused, but I think it was Raj's RSF 49ers. And it's like, oh man, 49ers got a seventh round steal. And you see the highlights. And I'm like, yeah, the highlights, they look good. When you watch the film, sometimes it's a different version of that, right? Because the highlights, it's legitimately one, you can make it kind of look like however you want. And I am not one to push narratives. So whatever I put on here, that's what I just saw. I want all these guys to win. I want all these guys to be good. But the highlights is like, okay, like, over 4 years, you accumulated 8 plays that you want to show everybody. But what is consistent? Who is this guy playing, play out? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? All right, we want to get to that. So there was a play in the game against Michigan where it was like a flea flicker. And they tricked the safety. Safety had bad eyes. He's looking at the quarterback, and the running back takes a step forward. Ronnie Bell sneaks past him, and they score a touchdown. Well, that doesn't really tell me anything about Ronnie Brown as a prospect. So again, you can see the highlight. Obviously, it accounts for the stats, but it does not tell me who he is and how his game translates to the NFL. So let's get into that. All right, I probably took a little too much time kind of get into who he is. All right, but what will Kyle love? And I think that was one thing that really jumped out right away. This dude, Ronnie Bell, is a tenacious blocker. And we all know if you are playing for Kyle Shanahan, you cannot be a punk. He weeds those guys out. And I think they've done a better job over the years of really like figuring out who wants to get dirty, who wants to get nasty, who's going to do the dirty stuff. And Ronnie Bell does that. He has no issues blocking any type of player. There was one play where he like missed an edge rusher, whatever. For the most part, I'd say what is consistent, he is a legit blocker. He takes pride in it. He has fun with it. I think the last clip in these blocking plays that I have here. You see a guy get into the end zone. He's jumping. He's celebrating. He's excited. Why is he so excited, man? He contributed with the block. His guy got in for the end zone. I feel like he takes pride in that. And for a guy that's not that big, 190 pounds, and you're blocking like this, this is a mindset. That's a mindset. That's a mindset of like being physical. That's a mindset of toughness. I talked about his bench press and where maybe we could see that kind of take shape in his game. And clearly, 14 reps on the bench press, that's 225 pounds. Dude is pretty strong. He's pretty strong. And you see that carry over in his blocking. Like he's getting dirty with guys after plays. Like those are the things I love. And I love finding that part out about him when I first cut on the film. I mean, it was apparent right away, and it was extremely consistent throughout every game that I put on. And I watched about five games. And really it takes you about 2 to 3 games to just know who a player is. And then you want to continue to watch and see, does anything else start to be more consistent? Or, is there a certain game? And I hate that. Like, what game should I watch? Oh, watch this game. This was his best game. Like, no, who was he throughout the season? And usually you can find that out over the course of 3, 4 games, etc. All right. But the blocking, very consistent. Every single game I put on, he took a lot of pride in that. All right. I would say that there were, how can you get the ball in his hands? What's the strength of his? I would say there were some gimmies and there were some routes versus off coverage. All right, routes versus off coverage. So I'm watching them versus off coverage, and he did a good job at times. Okay, and I want to show the good, and then there's going to be somewhere I feel like he was a little challenged, right? But running routes from off coverage, I think, is more ideal. Getting him out in space and being able to kind of maybe put a move on a guy, set him up, go an opposite way, score a touchdown. We saw him score a touchdown like that against TCU. I've seen some other clips when he was drafted where there were, like a post or whatever. But I think where he excels at is when he faces off coverage and he's able to kind of run free. He has a nice long stride. And if he can give you a little something at the top and go by a guy and score a touchdown. He's not a speedster. So even versus space, he's not just going to blow by guys. But when you did see him win, it typically looked like that. Off coverage, safety. Okay, I got this guy out in space. That's a favorable matchup for the receiver. Let me give him a little move and be able to go by him. All right. There were some gimmies here where you just see him run, some quick outs, things like that. I think that's, fairly simple for most receivers, regardless of if you're drafted in the first round, seventh round, or undrafted. You should be able to run a speed out versus off coverage and catch 5-yard passes. I wanted to throw a few in there just to show you that those things are happening, and that is not a negative. That's not a knock. Did what he's supposed to do. One was a nice toe tapping catch on the sideline. I really like that. All right. Now, where I feel like he struggled a little bit, or what was more consistent, right? When I ask myself, is it more consistent that he's winning versus off coverage or losing versus off coverage? And I would say I thought he lost a lot more versus off than he did as a just receiver, being able to whoop guys and consistently win that way. So it almost felt like the defensive backs weren't threatened. Again, we saw it versus TCU on the touchdown and another one on the post, but how consistent is that? And for the most part, even in the TCU game, you see guys just sitting on his routes. I mean, just sitting on his routes, really not threatened about him blowing by them or running by them. Even for a guy who averaged 15 yards per reception in the season, they were kind of just squatting on a lot of his routes. And I thought that was very consistent. And at first when I saw it, I'm like, okay, like maybe that's just a bad rep or whatever, or maybe the DB guessed right. And I just kept seeing it over and over and over again and over again. And I started to think, well, guys just aren't really respecting his speed, not on a consistent level, not on a consistent level. So he's running his route. I mean, they're just sitting on him. They're squatting on it. I saw guys squatting on some of his routes from a press bell. We see guys, and again, defensive backs are most vulnerable out in space. I think people think like, oh, playoff coverage. Like, dude, nobody want to play off. Everybody wants to play press. But some of these defenses, they got their guys playing off. And I thought guys did a fairly good job against him. Just being like, I'm comfortable. I'm off. He's not going to run by me. Let me squeeze this route. And that was really consistent throughout the film. There were times versus zone where I thought he did good and showed some good like nuance, right? There was a one time versus a little off where DB was about in that no man's land. That no man's land is typically, they call it no man's land or gray area, where you're about 5 yards off. and he just gave a guy a little and then pushed up and then boom, broke out, and it was a legit catch. I love seeing that. Uh, there were a couple other times where I saw him run a dig, and it was a nice little inside stem, pushed up, ran dig, clean. All right. And then maybe the next play, he came back in, inside stem, pushed up, broke out, nice and clean. And then I believe that was a play where he fought the ball away from the defender. It was a poorly thrown ball. All right. But those things, I'm like, that's good. I think that, like, that's good. That shows me that he has this type of ability. But for the most part, with the route nuance and his being able to win, I would like to see it be more consistent. And when you start to think about where he was drafted, I think that's a part of it where, man, we see these flashes of this type of ability that he might have, but how consistent is it? Because you do see a lot of losses. You see a lot of losses. All right. And then it didn't just stop there. Verse press, I was fairly underwhelmed on a consistent basis. All right. First rep here, you'll see him get outside, push up field, get the defensive back going upfield, and then sit his route down. Right. And I wanted to show you that because, like, that's what I'm looking for, to see him do those things on a consistent basis. I don't think it was very consistent. Consistently, I saw just guys running with him. You see him get pushed out of bounds. You see on vertical throws, he's getting strapped. There was a couple times where there was kind of a pass interference at the top of the route. But my thing was, well, yeah, you're probably going to have some of that type of opportunity because you can't separate from anybody, especially on the outside. Like, it looked tough. Now, again, when you watch highlights, you might see it in another film. But what was consistent in the 5 games that I watched was he was not really creating any type of real separation on the outside. I remember Kyle Shanahan saying, because it's not about the 40-yard dash. He ran a 4.54. It's not about that. Kyle Shanahan said, if you can just win on the outside, then you can play outside receiver. And I just thought that was not a strength of his. All right, that was not a strength of his. Just being able to truly consistently win on the outside with route nuance, setting guys up, maybe using half steps, maybe at the catch point. Is it something that's consistent? I would say, as far as just fade ball, jump ball, I don't think in those 4 or 5 games, I didn't see one. Now, again, I've seen some little highlights on Instagram. I've seen it here and there. But as far as what's consistent, because guys that catch jump balls, let's say Jamar Chase. I didn't think Jamar Chase was a great separator. But guess what? He ran a 4.3, and it didn't matter. When the ball was in the air, it's his. And you were going to see that any game that you put on, and I don't want to compare him to Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase was a top 5 pick. But just in the sense of how my brain works, any game you put on, Jamar Chase was making contested catches at the catch point vertically down the field. And I just did not see that from Ronnie Bell. That's not his game. All right. I think ultimately, really kind of the conclusion that I'm coming to, because I did see some other things where I saw him maybe run some routes with speed, and that part looked good. But I think he's better suited to be a slot receiver. All right. So that will give him the ability to block a lot more and be that physical blocker that he is, that I think Kyle Shanahan is going to really love. And then also maybe get some more advantageous kind of situations matched up against maybe safeties out in space, maybe matched up against a corner that's playing soft, right? And being able to kind of get a free release and run his routes from there. I think on a consistent basis, that's where you'll probably get the most value out of him. He's a smooth route runner. I do think he has good hands. I just think that there's some little things that he can bring on every single play, and it wasn't quite there consistently. So at this point, I'm still trying to figure out, who is Ronnie Bell, like, that the 49ers are getting. Like, why exactly did they draft him? I know it's not just for his blocking ability, which stands out, but as a route runner, can he be more consistent? Can he start being pressed more? Can he work his releases? I remember I had some of these issues with Danny Gray, and Danny Gray is the guy that ran a 4.33, right? But I was like, man, I'm watching Danny Gray, doesn't really use the threat of his speed on a consistent basis to, like, win on routes underneath. Now he can run a post, he can run a crossing route, and you can see some of those things from Ronnie Bell. But on the consistent basis where it's like, hey, I got to win, playing and play out, can you get open? And I think that's going to be a challenge for Ronnie Bell. It was a challenge for Danny Gray. And I think that's a part of why we didn't quite see Danny Gray on the field as much as people would have liked. You know, oh, it's Trey Lance. He was injured. Like, he was drafted for Trey Lance. Dude, you're an NFL receiver. You got to be able to win more than one way. I think for Ronnie Bell right now, the way that he was probably going to win the most is in the slot, where he's a good blocker out in space. And there's kind of some shades of maybe a Kendrick Bourne type guy. But again, when you start comparing guys to people like Kendrick Bourne, right, where Kendrick Bourne might be the exception as a receiver because he was an undrafted guy, right? Wasn't the fastest guy, but I thought he did a solid job of creating just some initial separation. I thought Kendrick Bourne was better off the line of scrimmage, and Kendrick Bourne was a contested catch monster. And I'm not sure if Ronnie Bell is those things, but I think drafting him in the 7th round, it's safe to say, hey, there's some things that we like. We see some ability. We'll give you that opportunity. Nothing's guaranteed when you're a 7th round pick. There are a lot of people like, oh, Croc hates the pick. I don't hate the pick. I think he was drafted accordingly. I think he was drafted 7th round, and as a guy, hey, if he can turn up and if he can be a little bit more consistent at some of these things of creating separation, routes, the blocking is obviously there. He's terrific there, but just being able to understand like how is he going to win and free himself up consistently, then he'll be solid. But I think those things are all still kind of question marks, at least in my opinion. Someone else might be a little bit more sold. I think congratulations on getting drafted. That's a big deal. Uh, it's going to be an uphill battle to make this squad. I'm curious to see what it looks like. Now, the one thing I didn't look at, and this is on me, I'm doing this video, his special teams value. So does he do punt returns? Does he do kick returns? Can he be a gunner? Like, I didn't look at those things. I would assume with his type of personality that I'm seeing on the film, he can do those things, and that will help him, right? Like that'll help him make the roster. If he can be a return guy and just you don't got to be a blazer, you don't have to be a threat to score every single time, but are you sure-handed on punt returns? Like coaches love that. Can you just pick up 9-10 yards? Like you'd be one of the better return guys in the league. Is he running down as a gunner and making tackles? They would love that. Can he run down on kickoff? So doing those type of things while he's trying to figure out how to be a little bit more consistent in the other aspects of his game, he could be terrific. So I love to see how he grows. Can't wait to watch him come, training camp, preseason, see what I'm seeing. Where has he improved? How consistent is he? Does his game look any different? All right. Those are going to be the things that we definitely start to evaluate, reevaluate, and all that good stuff. All right. But that's going to do it for this breakdown of 49ers rookie Ronnie Bell, receiver out of Michigan. Some things I like, and a lot of things where I'm like, gotta improve on these things. But athletes I feel like they're made to kind of prove people wrong. So I'm not saying I'm counting them out. I just think it's an uphill battle for him. We're gonna see how he shakes out there on the field and creates a role for himself. Peace.